Thank you for downloading this Council on Foreign Relations video. CFR is an independent national membership organization and nonpartisan research center. For more information, please visit us online at cfr.org.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's Council on Foreign Relations meeting. Our guest is Alvaro Uribe Velez, the President of the Republic of Colombia. Please note that this meeting is on the record. President Uribe is halfway through his second term as President of Colombia. He's, of course, best known for the design and successful implementation of democratic security policy in the country. His stamina and work ethic are the stuff of legend. He gives new meaning to the term 24/7. And the polls show that he enjoys huge popularity among voters in Colombia, and that his job approval rating is very high. At the same time, and we'll get into it today, his government, the country, and the Andean region as a whole continue to face some significant challenges. For today's format, President Uribe will give 5 or 10 minutes of opening comments. And then he and I will chat for about 20 minutes. I'll have some questions for him. President Uribe, some of you may have seen this, appeared on Charlie Rose last night. I can assure you I'm no Charlie Rose, but we've got plenty of good things to talk about, so that will make up for my shortcomings. After that, President Uribe will engage with our members and take questions and answers from you. When we get to that part, I would be grateful, I think we all would be, if each person asking the question could, 1, identify her or himself, 2, ask one short question rather than give a speech, and 3, help us stay focused on the key issues so that we don't not bounce around too much. One more administrative point. Cell phones and BlackBerries. Please take a moment now, I've done that already, to turn them off or silence the cell phones, pagers, BlackBerries. You don't want your phone to ring or buzz while we're in session. Thank you. Very well. President Uribe, thank you very much for coming back again to the Council on Foreign Relations. We're delighted to have you come and visit us again and to take the time from your extraordinarily busy schedule to come and speak with our members.
Thank you, Mr. Galvis. Mr. Vice President of the Council on Foreign Relations, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, members of our government, my colleagues in government, it is a great honor for us to come back this evening to this great audience. I have had the opportunity to come for several years. When I was presidential candidate during the first campaign, I asked to university students, have you thought to flee Colombia forever? At any time? And the vast majority of them raised their hands and said yes. For we chose one key word to lead our administration. This word is confidence. We compare Colombia to this chart. At the top we have written the word confidence. To live, to study, to invest, to find jobs, to enjoy the life in Colombia. We support confidence upon 3 pillars: security with democracy, investment confidence with social responsibility, and social cohesion. With security and investment, it is possible to create an environment of prosperity. What is necessary to advance in social cohesion. And social cohesion, finally, is the validator of security and the validator of investment. We work every day in our administration, doing our best to lead Colombia based on these pillars. I understood that you gave me 5 minutes for the introductory remarks, and I haven't learned how to speak shortly. But now I will adapt to your rules.
Oh, thank you. I promise I don't have any other rules, so appreciate that. And I think we're going to get into these topics in greater depth. Let's start with the question of democratic security, because it's one that is most frequently heard about in this country, but I think there's also a great deal of curiosity and lack of information because unfortunately not as many of us get to visit the country as frequently as we would like. Big blows to the FARC over the course of the last 6 months, culminating with the rescue of Ingrid Betancourt, the 3 Americans and other hostages. But what is the current situation and what comes next? Are there choices that your government needs to make, that the Colombian people need to make between negotiation and use of force? And what's the end game on that front?
The rescue of Mrs. Betancourt and the other hostages. We had within the hostages 3 Americans. And from the beginning, we placed the same emphasis to rescue them. For us, it was as important to rescue Ingrid Betancourt, the other Colombian, as to rescue the 3 Americans. It was not a sudden rescue. We worked for the rescue from the beginning of our administration. We began working to provide Colombians with democratic security at the very beginning of our administration. We have seen some results, but we need much more. If we add to the official numbers of that time the mass graves found during our administration, Colombia had years with 35,000 assassinations. Last year, we still had a high number, 17,400. This year, we see other decrease. In kidnapping, Colombia had a year with 3,500 cases. Last year, we saw 270. This year, we see a new decrease of 28%. Now kidnapping is located in rural, remote areas of the country. Bogotá, the capital city, is the 2nd safest city in the continent. Bogotá and the main Colombian cities have advanced a lot in security, but we understand we need much more to do. We have dismantled the paramilitary organization. Paramilitaries appear in Colombia as a reaction against FARC. Paramilitaries were private criminal organizations created to fight guerrillas. They committed the same crimes. They competed with guerrillas with the same cruelty. And we have dismantled this organization. Colombia has recovered the monopoly to fight criminals and the monopoly to provide justice for our people. Guerrillas are weakened. but we still have guerrillas with the capacity to create terror in our country, to produce terrorist acts. And although we have extradited to the United States 841 members of the narco-trafficking organizations, we still have many bandits in the business of narco-trafficking in our country. The balance between negotiation and our policy on democratic security. Our policy is a way to get peace. In the 90s, Colombia saw the reinsertion of 4,000 members of the guerrilla groups. During the 90s was a time of peace processes in our country. During our terms in government, we have seen that the mobilization of 48,000 members of the terrorist groups. By the beginning of our administration, roughly speaking, Colombia had 60,000 members of these groups. And we have provided all the facilities for those who have demobilized, for them to reinsert to the civil society. We are open for peace negotiations. But while FARC can make money from illicit drugs, it will be very difficult for them to accept negotiations. For a while, we negotiate one by one. This year, we have seen that the mobilization of 2,500 members of FARC. And this process is the process to negotiate with one, with other, with the third, etc. We are open, but I cannot say when Colombia is going to find good faith in FARC for peaceful negotiations. My guess is that we have to continue with all the determination in our policy on democratic security. Our policy has completed 6 years. Terrorist groups are acting in Colombia since the beginning of the 60s.
So it's a continuing process. The military aspect of it is an important one. I think one of the great insights was capturing the presence of the state in parts where perhaps the state had not been present before. What other areas does that manifest itself in terms of health, education, social policies? How are those rolled out across the country, perhaps in areas and to populations that have been underserved in the past?
For we have this combination. Security is accompanied by confidence to invest in our country, by the program we call our program for Colombia to get social cohesion. We have a set of social endeavors. In basic education, we had 78% of coverage. Now we have 94%. For the year 2010, our aspiration is to have 100% of coverage in basic education. We have gone behind the soldiers to every part of the country with our social tools. In education, for those who are under 5, we are beginning to create opportunities for massive coverage.
And is the challenge resources? Is it infrastructure? Is it security? What are the biggest obstacles in achieving those objectives?
Many obstacles. Many obstacles. Obstacles in our geography, in our infrastructure, in our budget, in our public indebtedness. Colombia has still 51% of its territory in jungle, in rainforest. We have in rainforest 578,000 square kilometers. We are a part of the Amazon basin. Our budget, at the beginning of our administration, Colombia had a fiscal deficit in the central government of 7.5. Now it is in between 3 and 3.2. It is still very complicated. In public indebtedness, Colombia had 50%, the proportion of indebtedness to the GDP. Now it has 27. Therefore, we have fiscal constraints, geographical obstacles, lack of infrastructure. But our administration is working to overcome all kinds of problems. We have advanced a lot in nutrition. Colombia had 3,300,000 children with under state programs in nutrition. Now we have 10 million. In microlending, we have advanced a lot. We have a program we call Families in Action. Through this project, we provide the poor families with subsidies for them to send their children to schools and to provide their children with health. We are advancing a lot. However, I am speaking to you about the portion of the glass that is filled. But we have a great part of the glass that it is still empty. Therefore, we have to work every day. And without investment, it is impossible to make sustainable our policy on security and to make sustainable our policy of social cohesion.
So on the investment front, there are a couple of components to it. One is policies followed by the government in the country. Another component of it, interestingly, is the trade agreement, right? Trade, people always think about the movement of goods and services, but bilateral trade agreements include important investment, pro-investment components to it. Is that part of the reason why you've been pushing so hard on the trade front and the free trade agreement? And while we're on that topic, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about your prognosis for what's going to be happening on that front here.
We need a free trade agreement. We are not optimistic that we would increase our exports to the United States in the coming years. But with the free trade agreement approved, many investors from several countries in the world will come to make investments in our country. And we think much more in having a high rate of investment than in having a seasonable growth rate in our GDP. For us, the most important asset is to have a high rate of investment. To promote investment in our country, we are working with several tools. First, our message. While other countries are hostile regarding the private sector, Colombia is very friendly. We give all the guarantees to the private sector to come to our country. We all give all the guarantees to domestic and international investors. We request from them social responsibility.
And what does that translate into?
In practical terms, social responsibility for our government is transparency in the relationship between investors and government. Transparency to assign contracts, to solve disputes, transparency in taxation, social responsibility is solidarity of investors with communities. There are many important issues. For instance, to produce coal. Colombia is a large producer of coal. It's very important. Social responsibility is fraternity in the relationship between employers and workers. Fraternity as opposition to social class hatred. Fraternity as opposition to wild capitalism. To attract investors to our country, we work every day to improve our macroeconomic indicators. We have restructured 411 state agencies without dismantling the state. The last one we restructured is Ecopetrol, the agency for oil. Now it is owned by private shareholders in 1% of 10.5%. The reform was very difficult. First, we introduced the labor reform, second, the pension reform, and after we opened the corporation for private shareholders in the middle of great opposition inside our country and in Latin America, because radical ideology in many countries in Latin America opposes to this kind of reforms. We have introduced tax incentives for investments in Colombia. Now you have the possibility to enjoy special economic zones. You pay only 15% in income corporate tax. The ordinary tariff is 33%. In free economic zone, you do not pay tariffs for inputs, nor value-added tax. In Colombia, shareholders do not pay taxes on dividends, and you have the right to sign a pact of stable rules with the government for 20 years. In addition to that, we are working to have free trade agreements. We have signed a free trade agreement with Chile, with Mercosur, with 3 Central American countries, with Canada. We are in negotiation with the European Union. We are negotiating agreements of bilateral protection of investments with China, with India, and of course we are in need to have the approval of the free trade agreement with the United States. And we have limitations, for instance, in infrastructure. We recognize that we have to do much more for our country to become much more competitive. But good news, during the last 2 years, the World Bank has scored Colombia as a leading country in reforms to create the best environment for doing businesses. Last year we got this score, and this year the same. And right now, we are beginning to work to try to have the same score the coming year.
Mr. President, before we turn to the audience, there's one other area that I want to spend a few minutes on, which is Colombia in the context of the Andean region. And there are a couple of elements there that are, I think, of interest to our members. One is that there are countries, Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, that are taking I think it's fair to say, radically different approach than Colombia is.
You warn me that this interview is on record. I am very prudent to speak about our neighbors
I
on
know,
record.
I know you
I
are.
need to be much more on record.
I know you are. But let's give it a try. Let's give it a try. There are a couple of topics that I think would be great to hear your views on. One is a favored term. There was a speaker here yesterday speaking on the record who referred to it. A favored term right now is multilateralism. And the question is, what is the room for unilateral action and for multilateral action in the context of the challenges in the region? Recent violence in Bolivia, the tensions that arose between Colombia, Ecuador, and Venezuela in the context of the Reyes situation. So that's sort of an issue of what's your view for unilateral action, multilateral action in the context of the Andean region, and some of the organizations that are available to facilitate.
Last week, the Association of South American Countries gave support to President Morales because he is the constitutional president, because we support democracy. Colombia, that has suffered violence a lot, has to set the example to reject violence wherever violence appears. And this morning I had the opportunity to speak with President Morales, and he said to us that he is engaged in a dialogue with the regions, with the speakers of the regions. We are very hopeful that our brother Bolivia can overcome the current difficulties. In the case with Ecuador, Ecuador is our brother. We have and we want not to have problems with Ecuador. We have problems with terrorists, with our own terrorists, with FARC, with ELN, with narco-traffickers, with those who were members of the paramilitaries, did not demobilize, and are now converted into simple narco-traffickers. You know that Raúl Reyes, a FARC leading figure, killed many people in Colombia. And when we bombarded him, he was in the jungle in Ecuador. The world knew that debate, but I, as President of Colombia, should no longer air this debate. In a very constructive approach, what we beg from our neighbors is help to fight terrorist groups. And we have one moral authority. We are a democracy. In Latin America, there were insurgent groups without illicit drugs fighting dictators. In Colombia, we have a pluralistic democracy being challenged by terrorist groups funded with illicit drugs. The reason that we are a pluralistic democracy with all the freedoms, with international supervision, we are open to NGOs, and they go to Colombia whenever they want. Many times I argue with them, but they enjoy freedom in Colombia, and they say about Colombia whatever they want. We have a system of democratic freedoms. Therefore, we have the moral authority to beg from our neighbors to fight the terrorist groups that hurt my fellow country citizens. I want not to speak about my neighbors. I need to speak about Colombia. We are working 5 standards for our democracy to be better every day. Security for all Colombians, freedoms, social cohesion, a state made up of checks and balances, and our fight for transparency as a pillar for people to trust in our democratic institutions. One very important point in our country is that Colombia is a country of institutions. In Colombia, the president cannot choose one investor or the other. Investors depend in Colombia on our institutions, and our institutions are transparent and totally friendly to investors. One key point you should keep in mind when you want to remember Colombia, please think in Colombia as a country of trying to do the best to have investment confidence. Maybe Colombia, for its specific reasons, has much more interest in bringing investors to the country than other countries in the region. We are openly friendly with investment in our country.
Thank you. Let's turn to the members now, and if you could identify yourself, and again, brief question. We'll start over here.
Thank you, Sergio. Señor Presidente, un verdadero placer. My name is Joe Hill. I'm an attorney at MetLife. Given the worldwide credit crunch, could you please comment on the implications you think that has for Colombia's development in the next few years?
We have improved a lot. However, this year we suffer an economic slowdown. Our investment rate has passed from 12 to 27.9. Our direct foreign investment has passed from 700 million to 10 billion. We have increased a lot our economic performance. This year we have suffered an economic slowdown. Our financial sector is better protected than 6 years ago. 6 years ago, the protection against bad loans was 39%. My government introduced what we call a specific implicit risk for any specific economic sector. And we have increased the protection up to 112. We are in much better shape to deal with this crisis than before. We have suffered inflation, especially inflation of foods, of agriculture inputs. But we are working to produce much more. The basic inflation is 3.9, but the inflation in foods has reached 12, 14. Now we hope that it will begin to go down, to reverse. The inflation rate this year could be in between 7 and 7.5. We had reached 4.4 2 years ago. We We face these problems at this moment, but there is good news. One good news is that we have the high investment rate this year in the middle of these economic difficulties. And you can have one of two options. One option is to have these problems without investment confidence. And the other option is to have these problems with investment confidence. Unfortunately, Colombia is having investment this year in the middle of economic difficulties. This year we have kept with an investment rate of 27.5%, and the Minister of Trade says that this year he thinks Colombia will get $11 billion of foreign direct investment.
Yes, please.
Señor Presidente, Wendy Lures from the Foundation for Civil Society. I've done a certain amount of work in your country, and my understanding is that Francisco Galán, who was the spokesperson for the ELN, is broken all ties now with the ELN. How are you taking advantage of these kinds of defections that are going on with the guerrilla?
First, all the mobilized people are very well treated by our government. You imagine how expensive it is for our budget to sustain the reinsertion of 48,000 people. I have spoken many times with Francisco Galán. We gave him, ¿cómo es que se dice la liberación condicional? Conditional release from jail, pero eso tiene otro nombre. Parole. We gave him parole. We gave him parole before he completed his sentence. And he has come to see me many times. I have given him all the authorization to make contacts with ELN. But he has said to me, Mr. President, I have felt ELN does not want to advance in peace talks. I have not denied anyone the right to facilitate agreements with terrorist groups. But in this case, Francisco Galán, with all the good faith, has not succeeded yet. Therefore, the only way I have at this moment is to go after the ELN with all the strength of our democratic institutions. In the last weeks, in our permanent meetings with communities, we conduct 2 weekly community meetings, one on Monday and the second on Saturdays. In Mondays, we examine with communities how our policy of democratic security is going on in this specific region. In the last meetings on security, people have come to see us and have said to us, pay attention, ELN is in illicit drug businesses as every terrorist group. Because ELN wanted to appear as the good guys, and they are narco traffickers, as the others. Francisco Galán was not. Francisco Galán belonged to that time of ideological guerrillas. He was Marxist oriented. And right or wrong, he fought for one ideological cause. But his successors in the ELN are with the illusion of easy money made from illicit drugs.
All the way in the back, here on the left.
Thank you, Mr. President. Jeffrey Gilbert from Pfizer Pharmaceuticals. It strikes me that on the one hand, for some countries in the region, the absence of economic reforms has led to the export of its citizenry to the United States, something analogous to what Ireland did in the 18th century. And while on the other hand, the U.S. government's policy toward the region has been really one or two-dimensional, focused on free trade agreements and the Millennium Challenge account. And so thinking ahead to the future administration, how would you like to see the United States engage the region beyond the FTAs and the Millennium Challenge account? Thank you.
It is quite difficult to me to say something about the future of this country now when you are in this political debate. But let me speak about not the role the United States should play in the region, but about the needs of our region. Our region, Latin America, needs to find alternative sources of energy. Any industrialized country, such as the United States, has the opportunity to give us support in this way. We need to promote small enterprises. The United States, through the multilateral financial institutions, could give us strong support for small enterprises. It is very important. I admire the universal democratic values predicted, practiced by the United States. It is very important to insist all over Latin America in the necessity to live with democratic values. It is very important to insist in this way. Free trade agreements. We should consider free trade agreements as a way to, at any moment, get the integration of the continent. The holistic integration. Integration in political dialogue, integration in social cooperation, integration in economics. Therefore, I consider the free trade agreement not as an end by itself. It is a means to have much more integration, and we understand that any free trade agreement needs the social chapter. And in the free trade agreement we have already negotiated with the United States that is waiting for approval in Congress. We included the social chapter that is very beneficial for our workers.
Shannon?
I'm Shannon O'Neill from the Council on Foreign Relations. And I want to ask you a question about institutions. And a notable pattern that we've seen in the Andean region over the last 10 years is the frequent changing of the political rules of the game, of the political institutions. So about 10 years ago, we saw a new constitution go into effect in Venezuela, and then a year ago, referendum for other political changes. In Ecuador and Bolivia, there's new constitutions waiting in the wings, waiting for a referendum that are coming up in the next weeks and then months. And then in Colombia, we've seen calls from many people to change the political rules of the game to allow for your re-election for a third term. And so I'd like you to reflect on the benefits of changing some of the rules in the Andean region, in the political rules for inclusive democracy, but also some of the costs for these frequent changes of the political rules of the game.
I cannot accept that you compare any reform to give the people the right to vote with all reforms that could affect democratic institutions. Colombia is very stable on democratic institutions. Now every investor going to Colombia, or either domestic investors, they have the right to sign pacts on stable rules, with 20 years with the government. Colombia has suffered terrorism for almost 60 years. And our government has fought terrorism for 6 years. My generation has not lived one single day in complete peace. We have the right to work for the new generations to enjoy living in Colombia without these risks. I am working for my fellow country citizens to re-elect these 3 policies, not to re-elect me. I have the obligation to do my best to convince the vast majority of my fellow country citizens that we need long-term policies. Policy on security, policy on investment, policy on social cohesion, with adjustments. We have many problems, therefore we need adjustments without abandoning the fundamentals. And these 3 policies are the fundamentals. There are reforms bringing limitations and distortions to democracies, and there are reforms bringing possibilities for democracies.
Yes, Mike.
Hi, Mr. President, Blake Hyder from Citi. What's your perspective? We appreciate it's somewhat out of your hands at the central bank, but on capital controls, even somewhat weakened capital controls for a country trying to attract foreign investment?
We still have a fragile situation. Therefore, we have to be very careful to give our people the rules for them to prosper. My government does not want hyper appreciation nor hyper depreciation, devaluation. We need a stable, competitive exchange rate. Volatility is very dangerous, especially for countries such as Colombia. We have suffered volatility. This year, our exporting sector has suffered a lot because of the huge appreciation. Our exporting sector has made significant efforts to improve competitiveness, but with this appreciation, their results in productivity cannot be translated into results in competitiveness. Therefore, my government was obliged to introduce a differentiation between capitals bringing to the country with long-term vision and capitals coming to the country with the idea of short-term profits for the period of huge appreciation. And as you know, and I suppose you know because of your question, we introduce limitations to the short-term capitals. At the moment, we saw the reverse in the appreciation trend. We began to lift the limitations. 2 weeks ago, we dropped the limitations for those short-term capitals coming to the country to intervene in the stock market. The only limitation we still have in place is the limitation for short-term capitals to go to looking for fixed rent for papers with a fixed rent. The Minister of Finances is looking very closely the evolution of the economy, and our idea is at the right moment we will eliminate this limitation as we have done with other limitations. But please, I beg your the understanding of Wall Street about this. The worst for private investors is to have political instability in any country. If we cannot protect the competitiveness of our exporters, we run the risk of political instability, what is a very bad path for investors. What we have done is to preserve political stability in our country.
Yes, up here.
Nancy Kensner from Law Debenture Trust. You spoke of the narco-traffickers being active beginning in the 1960s through several administrations that continued to grow. How did you find the personal fortitude?
How do I?
How did you find the personal fortitude and the courage to do what you did, and weren't you afraid?
If I think in these matters, I will get scared. And I am afraid to be scared. Apologize.
Yes, please.
Bill Shear, Houlihan Lokey. We have a problem here in this country I'd like you to comment on. I think it's linked to some of the challenges you face as well. To use layperson's words, I think we have an incoherent immigration policy that is not helping the fabric of this society be cohesive or coherent, your third pillar. And while you don't get asked this question often, I guess, I'd like you to share any thoughts you might have had about what we should do to improve the way we deal with our immigrants, and hopefully that builds a stronger and better bridge to your country.
6 years ago, when I was elected for first time, Colombians living here in the States requested Ambassador Barcom, who was the first Minister of Foreign Affairs in our administration, requested her and me to ask the government of the United States for the TPS. We made comments to your government, but you know that during the last times the United States had not granted this status. When I speak with Colombians living here in the States, they urge us on the necessity to legalize their situation in the States. they work honestly. They have the right. But we understand that the United States, the government, has to be careful to not allow massive immigrations. Therefore, we consider that the best combination could be to legalize in the United States those working honestly, and to work with the source countries, in this case with Colombia, to help these countries for their people, not to go to other countries. The free trade agreement is one way. It's one of the ways we need for investors to come to our country, to provide our people with opportunities. And the more our people find opportunities in our country, the less they will want to flee the country.
Mr. President, there are many questions left, but we have arrived at 7:30 p.m. And we will have to bring this very interesting session to a close. But again, on behalf of the Council on Foreign Relations, I want to thank you for your frankness, your energy, and your willingness to come and speak with our members. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Gracias.
Thank you for watching this Council on Foreign Relations video. For additional audio, video, and transcripts of CFR meetings, as well as expert analysis of international news, please visit us online at cfr.org.